And on this Thursday, and I'm calling this Transit Commission meeting to order with a quorum present. The second item is public comments. Before I offer public comments, I just want to remind everyone to please try to keep it to 3 minutes or less. And nobody on the commission or anybody on the dais here will be able to answer questions or respond. So just so you know that. Is there any public comment? Come on up.
Hello, my name is Donna Krause. I live at 1036 South 4th Avenue in Wausau, Wisconsin, 54401. I'm also Marathon County Board Supervisor on the Health and Human Services Committee, and I'm also a bus rider passenger for the past 4 or 5 years. And I wanted to talk about a few things that bus passengers are experiencing, not just presently, but also in the past. It seems that most bus passenger complaints that I'm aware of is that they are not able to sit down in their seats before the bus driver speeds away on the bus. And what happens then is that they are propelled forward, jolted forward, they lose their balance, they fall on other passengers, they fall into the plastic hard seats, they fall on the floor, they're shoved or pushed into the sharp steps. And often they fall, and if it's in the front, they fall on the elderly, people in wheelchairs, and children. Now, the possibility of being injured is quite high when that happens. It is against ADA law. For a normal, healthy person, the occurrence can be problematic, but for an elderly person or a disabled person, or an elderly disabled person, this can be problematic and traumatic. Resultant muscle sprains and strains, bruises, whiplash, scrapes, fractured or broken bones, twisted ankles, and even worse, a concussion, black eye, or missing teeth can occur in this event. My suggestion is, as in ADA paratransit and transit rules and regulations, the Metro ride bus drivers must wait until all are safely seated before the bus starts and takes off. And I'll read to you ADA law. Passengers with disabilities must be allowed adequate time to board and disembark from a transit vehicle. This includes light rail and rapid rail doors staying open long enough for a person with a disability to board or disembark. It also includes a bus operator waiting until a passenger is seated before leaving a bus stop. If you have a mobility disability or have difficulty maintaining your balance while a bus is moving, ask your bus driver to wait until you are seated before driving away. Drivers are required to honor your request. In talking to one of the bus drivers after I was thrown forward and pulled out my right arm and side by grabbing onto the bus railing and swinging around and flopping into my seat. When she pulled into the transit center, I asked her, isn't there a law where you have to wait until the passenger sits down in their seat? And I was headed toward the front seat, the very first disability elderly seat. She says, there's no such law, no rule, no policy. I can start the bus when I want. She says, if you're concerned about it, call the office. And I said, well, now things are being handled by HR. And I said, because, people are calling in to make complaints. She said, those complaints are all false. There's no truth in any of them. We were told there's no truth at all. I said, well, why would people be making complaints? She says, because there's a lot of strange people around here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Okay. Thank you. Item number 3, approval of minutes, March 18th, 2021. They're in your packet. Any issues, provisions, anything you need to change? Otherwise, I'll take a motion to accept.
Motion to accept.
Thank you. Could I have a second?
I'll second it. It's Kathy.
Okay, Kathy.
Sorry I'm late. I couldn't get on the, it wouldn't let me get into the WebEx.
Yeah, ooh, hang on. Okay, Kathy, yes. It was, there was an issue, so thank you for letting us know that you're on now.
Well, I'm on the phone, so.
Right. We have your phone, so thank you. So, okay, so we have a motion and a second to accept the minutes of March 18th. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that passes unanimously. Number 4 is the approval of the minutes of the March 31st, 2021 meeting. That was our special meeting. Again, those minutes are in the packet.
Motion to accept.
Okay, thank you. What's not on your agenda? Not on my agenda. Oh, that's last month. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the wrong packet. I'm sorry. That's okay. Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it. It's
Thank you.
Kathy.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And those pass. Okay, we're on number 5, discussion and possible action on disadvantaged business enterprise program, otherwise known as DBE.
In your packet is a draft DBE program. The DBE program is required by the federal government if we are to spend more than $250,000 in federal funding on contracting opportunities. We have not exceeded that $250,000 threshold for a number of years. We stopped meeting the threshold when we took paratransit in-house in 2012, and so we've not had to have a DBE program. Because we took CARES funding in 2020, we exceeded the threshold, just barely, by about $25,000. So each year we have to make this assessment, are we going to exceed the threshold? And I indicated that we would not, but because we went over the threshold after the fact, I notified the Federal Transit Administration. I asked what it is we were supposed to do. And so the first step is to go back and reestablish a DBE program, and so that is what is before you. So the DBE program is it is a way for us to encourage the participation of disadvantaged business enterprises to do business with us. So we would like to spend some of our federal dollars on disadvantaged business enterprises, and this program establishes a plan to gain that participation. So it starts with, the objectives of the policy and our overall policy statement. And then the plan outlines various assurances that we will provide and methods that we will pursue in order to get public participation. As I said, this is the first step in reestablishing the policy. And then I am to go back and establish goals for the period 2020 through 2023 and complete DBE reports, 2 reports for 2020, even though we didn't have a DBE program. So it's kind of a convoluted process at this point. But in order to meet the requirements under the reg, the FTA is having me go back and reestablish the program and do the reporting after the fact. Any questions?
Greg, I guess I was aware since back in the 80s when I was living in Chicago and dealing with some City of Chicago grants, that the City of Chicago was calling it more, unless I'm wrong about this, more of a minority business and
Correct.
incentives of doing it. And a part of that was that women that were actually the owners, not the husband, and then for other businesses with other minorities were considered to be allowed some additional points, so to encourage working with small businesses. And I thought as part of that, I guess I don't like the name or just using the initials as such, that it had to do with in all phases of the City of Chicago. And I guess I can see where that could develop as well within Wausau, and that we may be looking at some vendors that are covering all of Wisconsin or the Midwest, and then trying to get vendor information about that, and that a number of companies that I've worked for, they wanted to know the minority FTEs, full-time equivalents, so that they had that information. So I guess I'm just concerned, especially for Mayor Katie, that this is something that may apply to transit, but I can see the benefit applying to the whole city. And then, do you want to just keep it very narrow? Or is it something that, I don't know if the city really has an overall purchasing agent, so that if something happened to Greg or you retired or whatever, we would have this policy overall for the city.
Well, if I could address this portion, this plan is required by the Federal Transit Administration. There may be similar requirements for the Housing Authority, for instance, or any other city department that seeks or receives federal money. In terms of your understanding of who's covered by this, it's minority business enterprises, it is women-owned enterprises, and it is also low income. We have to seek low-income participation as well. So all of the above are included in this program. This document was prepared based on a template established by the Federal Transit Administration. I don't know whether the same format would be used by the other departments or whether or not it's appropriate. But this covers transit.
Alder Peckham?
Yes, thank you. I have two questions for, I guess both are for Greg. One is whether we have any choice. It seems like we have got into the expenditure level where we need to do this, so I'm not sure whether we have any choice in the matter. And the second question would be whether this is going to have an impact on the solicitation of services for the initiatives that we were talking about last time for technical upgrades and stuff like that for the system.
Yes, it is required. We have no choice. If we are going to remain in compliance with the Federal Transit Administration, this is one of the program areas that we need to address. So yes, it's required. In terms of will it affect other procurements? Yes, we will have to manage all of our procurement activity consistent with the DBE plan. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to establish DBE goals. It means overall we have to consider where we seek bids or price quotes. We have to seek out price quotes or solicitations from DBE vendors. So it may mean we broaden our procurement area. It may mean we do advertisements for capital projects in areas where there is greater DBE participation. For instance, we could put it in newspapers in the Madison area or the Milwaukee area or Chicago, all of which may attract DBE participation. But this is just a matter of making an effort to get them to participate. It doesn't mean that we have to have participation in every procurement.
Okay, if I could just follow up. So is this on the agenda primarily just so the Transit Commission is aware of these new requirements and functions?
It has to be adopted by the governing body of the transit system, and that is the Transit Commission, and that's why it's on the agenda.
I would move to approve.
I'll second it, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. Oh, hang on, go ahead.
Okay. It just happens from my work at New Hope Project back in the 90s, that was welfare reform. We ended up having a minority auditing firm, and luckily they had that available in Milwaukee. But for where we're located, we may have major difficulties in finding companies and sellers that actually are in these categories. So I think we're going to end up, part of it is that we're going to need to compile a list for our region of these different companies. And I do think if we don't have that information, it would be helpful through City of Wausau purchasing to be looking at this, and for other projects, including road projects in the future, this could be bringing in other potential contractors. But even for the audit, we may need to look at what other options we have for auditors for the annual audit. And part of this is, I think, getting the data and then how to find these resources. And I would think maybe working with some other transit authorities in the Madison and Milwaukee area may be able to streamline things, but it doesn't really go over all of the details involved. And but just in about every category, we should be having this information, and it's probably going to increase the vendors and distance from vendors to us dramatically, and maybe by even 1,000 miles or more. And so I think this is it's difficult just to go from, okay, 0 step to step 1, because it's having to get that information. But I wonder if consulting with some other transit authorities that we may end up finding a lot more information to help us get up to speed on that.
Actually, if you look at page 6, the very top, it talks about the directory of DBE firms that we will use. The Wisconsin DOT maintains a DBE directory, and there are several entities that participate or contribute or certify DBE firms that end up in that directory. City of Madison is one, City of Milwaukee is the other, and the Wisconsin DOT is the third. And so I've indicated that we will be using the DBE directory. There is just one DBE listed in the directory in Marathon County, and it's a trucking firm, which has little relevance for our purposes. So achieving DBE participation will be a challenge. The vast majority of our expenditures in any given year is on labor. More than 70% of our expenses are labor. We also pay for associated city services. That's another $200,000 or so. And so the amount that we would normally spend or would be available for contracting, goods and services like fuel or parts or whatever, the number is relatively small overall. This influx of CARES money has dramatically increased our contracting opportunities and may do so for the next 2-3 years. And so that's why we're having to address this now.
Okay. The other point I wanted to make is that when I was aware of the city of Chicago doing this back in the 80s, there ended up some that were possibly bad. So you might want to entail as well getting information from the Better Business Bureau as well for information, because I do think we want to make sure that we get contractors that are going to be able to follow through, and maybe some of them went out of business or may not have a good record. And so maybe having the Better Business Bureau as well as additional documentation. But I would think for our audit for this coming year, we should be looking at minority new auditors. Thank you.
Just so you're aware, there's also a debarment and suspension system in place, so that contractors that are debarred or suspended from doing a business because of the things you're talking about are listed. So when we do a procurement, one of the things that I have to do is search the system for contract management on the federal site to certify that they are indeed in good stead.
Good, that's good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? If not, we have a motion and a second, and all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I got everybody. Okay, that passes. Thank you. Discussion and possible action on bus capacity limits.
So my staff and I have been having discussions about capacity. We've had kind of an ongoing dialogue over time this last year about capacity limits. I've got it on the agenda for a couple of reasons. One is it's kind of a recurring item. But I wanted you to know where we are with capacity at this point and give you an opportunity to weigh in if you choose. So we are on a daily basis at or near capacity on a number of routes. And we are on occasion stranding passengers. And this primarily happens to school and from school, and this involves generally students. And this is not to say that we're inundated with large crowds. We are just somewhat exceeding our current capacity limits, and it's set at 15. There are times when we can reroute some routes and swing over a few blocks and distribute the load a little better and manage to get everyone there without having to strand. There are other times, like this afternoon, where we left John Muir without 4 students. And then we left West High with that same route, leaving others standing. So capacity is a concern at this point. It is not, a huge concern. It is my thought that the capacity limits that we've established along the way here have been, I think, guideposts, but I think they've been somewhat arbitrary in that I think parents have decided whether or not kids should travel on the bus. We've not turned mass numbers of students or other passengers away. We get close. I think we've guessed kind of right, but I think it's somewhat artificial in that parents, I think, have decided whether or not to send their kids. I think at this point in the game, my staff and I would be comfortable if the limits were lifted, and we had more flexibility to take on the 4 more students or the half a dozen more students. I don't think at this point that lifting the capacity limit is going to cause us to be overwhelmed or we're going to have standing loads. I think it would just allow us to take on perhaps 20 kids on the bus or a few more, but I don't think we're going to be having full buses for quite some time. So that's my update. If you choose to act, that's fine. If not, we'll stick with the 15.
Alder Peckham?
Thank you. I had a question for Greg. I'm wondering, like, for the remainder of the school year, do you think if we stuck with the capacity limits we have now, do you think the situation with leaving students behind would get better or get worse? I mean, does ridership pick up, or what's the expectation?
Ridership has indeed picked up, and I do think it will get worse. We've seen ridership ticking up, and we're having more instances of being at or over capacity. My personal thought is people become more comfortable, this is going to become a bigger problem, and that is my biggest concern at this point, is that we're going to be stranding more people.
In light of that, and as usual, I'm not meaning to curtail the discussion, but I would move to stick with, or go with the transit manager's recommendation and lift the limits at this time.
Thank you for the motion. Is there a second? Yep. Okay, we have a second.
Can I ask a question?
Yep, hang on. Okay, I just second by Ryan. Go ahead.
My question is that mask mandate from the federal Department of Transportation, how long is that in effect for?
There is no timeline as far as I know. I think it's in effect until it's rescinded, but I don't see it going away anytime soon.
Okay. That's good. I was just curious, you know.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else have any questions?
I would add one more, if I could add one more thing.
Go ahead.
You know, once we exceeded the CDC guidelines and we lifted it beyond 10,
Yeah, I think she's next.
we're in kind of arbitrary territory. And so we could lift it to 20, we could lift it, but I don't know what the basis for that decision is. CDC guidance was 10, and it still is. I've been waiting for CDC to modify the guidance, and they just have not. And so I would just like the flexibility to accommodate people. And if it's a concern, I'll be back looking for a limit.
Sure. Sounds good. Hang on. Yeah, Jen, you're next.
Thank you. You know, in response to Greg's comment and in general, I just want to say that the number 10 was arbitrary to begin with. We can talk all day and night about the arbitrariness of numbers, but the fact remains the more people are packed into a closed space, the higher the risk. The risk has not been significantly mitigated, and I think people's perception that the risk is lowered doesn't match up with the reality that the risk isn't lower. So I understand that people are feeling more comfortable being in enclosed spaces with more and more people, but the science doesn't reflect that, and I think that's why the CDC hasn't changed those guidelines. So there's a reason that those guidelines are there, and I still think that we should be following them, and I think we should be mindful that the last time that this body voted to, or one of the last times that this body voted to increase those capacity limits, the board did not take that recommendation. So I think it behooves us to keep the restriction in place as is, which was the will of the board, and I think we should leave it at that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Deb.
All right, thank you, Becky. For me, I have lived in the 80s in downtown Chicago in the South Loop, which was the Printers Row area. And I would be able to walk to work, but would take the bus whenever I wanted to. we're talking about a bus route that goes 15 minutes out and then circles back. We're not talking about a bus route that may go miles and miles and maybe over an hour ride to get to up to some other neighborhoods. Good friend of mine that I worked with back in the 80s that I keep in touch with, she has not, from where she lives on the northeast side, gone downtown Chicago in about a year. But the risk with her and the buses and the L and all that are packed conditions. And you're talking about very long commutes that could be up to an hour. We are talking about a 15-minute one-way commute and then coming back. So, and for me, I got my second vaccination yesterday and no adverse functions at this point. But I do think that we should be going with increasing the capacity, and that with people wearing masks, and because it is such a short route, the risks are very low compared to longer distance commutes. So I'm for taking the limit off. Thank you.
I guess I'm going to weigh in here quick. I'm going to be in support of this. We have offered a service to our community. I understand that there are risks, but the school has tasked children to go to school. And because of that, we have decided far back that we were going to be a service provider for that. And I feel that's part of our service that we stated we would provide. This is a very, crazy time, and we certainly didn't expect this to happen. I think we have been very cautious up to this point, and that's okay. But I just agree that I don't believe we're going to be nose to glass, as Greg said. Any action we take can always be taken away. But I think that I have always had heartburn about leaving people stranded when we have stated we were going to do this service. If his drivers and his supervisors think that they're okay with this, then I am too. I think that there are some differences from when the council pushed back a bit on raising the limits. One was there was not a mask mandate. We didn't have the drivers protected with plexiglass slats. So there were some differences there. And the vaccines are getting disseminated greatly. So I am going to be supporting this also. Is there any other comments from the commission? Otherwise, we're ready. We have a motion and a second.
Sorry, I would like to make one more.
Oh,
follow-up
certainly. Go
comment.
ahead.
Sure. So I understand that the ride length is less than it might be elsewhere, but 15 minutes is exactly the amount of time of close exposure that the CDC says transmits COVID-19. So even if you're on a bus for 15 minutes, if you're on the bus with someone who's got COVID, mask mandate or no, and you're packed on there, I mean, there is the risk there. And I just, we've been inundated with news for a year about COVID, so I know we're all a little news weary. But just looking at some of the statistics, Wisconsin is only 25% vaccinated, and I believe that's just adults. So we are nowhere near the level of vaccination that warrants throwing caution to the wind at this point. It's always been true that it's our goal to provide service to community members, but it should also be our goal not to kill people in the process. So, I mean, the level of variant that's spreading in Wisconsin, our cases are on the uptick again. It's really, I mean, all sorts of experts have cautioned we're almost at the end of the tunnel, but we're still in the tunnel. We see the light, yes, but this is not quite it. So I urge this commission, and I will urge the Board of Supervisors to keep limits in place. So thank you, and I I will,
Thank you. Hang on,
This is Kathy.
Go ahead, Kathy.
I'm a rider, and I also don't think we should increase the number. We only got a couple more months of school, and the weather's warmer. I think we should, the numbers keep on going up, and I just don't feel safe. And I don't think we should risk the riders or the drivers.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I want to clarify something. This is not going to council, correct? I don't plan on it going to council.
That is up to this body.
Okay, the last raise we did not do to council. This commission can make that decision on its own.
I believe that's true.
Okay. So, yeah. Ma'am, I see your hand keep coming up, and I'm sorry, but we're not taking public comment anymore, thank you. I just don't want you to think I'm ignoring you. So, we have a motion. Anybody else? I want everybody to be able to speak, I see Ms. Alder Peckham, you have a hand raised. Go ahead.
Yep, and one more time. I think Ms. Bizzotto makes a very good argument, but I think the number of times when the bus is going to be very crowded are quite small, and I think we can do this with low risk. I also trust that the transit director will keep an eye on the numbers of, cases in the area and stuff like that, and I think he would be confident in retracting this action on an emergency basis if he felt it was necessary. So I think we're okay with going ahead.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I will reiterate, the motion is to lift the limits on the bus capacity at this time. And as always, Greg can come back. We can call an emergency meeting, as we have done, if there's any changes in what Greg sees as a necessary reduction again. So with that, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
nay.
Nay.
Okay, that passes 3-2. Thank you. Discussion and possible action on passenger fare collection.
As you recall, this body suspended the collection of passenger fares back in March of last year originally, and that has been extended through the end of June this year. I placed it on the agenda in case you wanted to consider extending. We were going to reevaluate in April for that reason, and so that is why it's on the agenda. In terms of exposure, certainly the exposure is still there. If we were to collect fares again, there are a few things that we're going to have to modify. One is that we're going to have to figure out how to collect tickets and transfers and that sort of thing in an alternative way. I don't want drivers handling that, so we're going to have to create a collection plate of sorts and have customers provide us those materials without having to touch every piece as it comes in. Fare collection can go through the fare box, but the making of change passes hands. And so most other systems stopped making change a long time ago. We are one of the outliers that has continued to do that. So I would suspend the making of change for customers if we were to start collecting fares. Budget-wise, I did not anticipate we were going to suspend fare collection at all for this year, so I didn't budget for this. But as I've said previously, we have CARES funds that can cover passenger fares while they're suspended. And if you choose to extend this, CARES funds would still be there to cover that. I haven't made a budget projection, but our overall Collection every year is about 300,000, so if we were not to collect fare through the entire year, we'd have to cover that with CARES funding, and that would be the total. I'm not advocating either way. Part of me would really like to kind of get back in the swing of things and start collecting fares. On the other hand, we've talked in the past about free fare systems and those sorts of things, and this is kind of a trial period for that, and I find that attractive. So it's on the agenda for your discussion.
Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering if Greg has any handle on how the drivers feel about it. When the discussion started, I was thinking that, yeah, we should do this, but if we have the funds to do it, I guess I'll shut up and ask how the drivers feel about it.
I don't think the fare collection is really the issue. They do not want to be making change. They would like, if this were to occur, they would like this to be contactless if possible. That's really not possible because of the tickets we collect and that sort of thing. I mean, there will be an exchange. We could make it as contactless as possible for our drivers. However, all of those things need to be counted in the office, the next day. And so our personnel will be handling fare media regardless. But in terms of bus operators, I think if we make it as contactless as possible, I think they're fine. I guess I would also add that the union is in touch with other locals around the state, and they're well aware that others started collecting fares long ago. So again, we're kind of an outlier in this regard. We've chosen to spend CARES money on passenger fares, but many other transit systems have not done that, and they're aware of that as well.
I was just going to mention, if we're only getting $300,000 of fares collected a year, and we were looking at potentially $600,000 for a new type of collection, it seems that some of the writers are talking about what is going on in Stevens Point and maybe some other areas that are using Wi-Fi and their phones as a way to actually handle that and just have a scanner as you get into the bus. So I do think it's worth looking at these other options, but if we're only collecting $300,000 in fares a year, I see no point in doing some multifaceted new collection equipment of $600,000 that is more archaic and that a lot more people are using their cell phones.
If I could address that. So fare boxes do more than just collect the fares. They help us generate the operating statistics that are required by the Federal Transit Administration every year. So I bemoan the fact that fare boxes are expensive, but collecting these statistics so that we can report them is an essential thing. The alternative to a fare collection device like a fare box is to survey on an ongoing basis. So we would have to hire people and to do surveys several times a month throughout the year in order to get the statistical information. And then it's just survey information. It is not actual counted information, so your accuracy is far less. In terms of other fare collection mechanisms, that's one of the things that I hope to have addressed in the study that we're about to embark on. In terms of the mobile payments that you're referring to, I want to point out there are downsides to that convenience, and the downside is you're paying a firm to take a portion of your fares off the top. The ones that I've spoken with, the vendors would take about 15% off the top. So it's convenient, yes, but there's a cost to that. And so we would either have to pass that on to the customer, or we would get less revenue.
I just wanted to make the point, though, Greg, with each cell phone being scanned, that's telling you one person. So that would give you the data of how many are actually coming on the bus. So I guess I'll inquire a little bit further and trying to find out more information about it. But I do think there is some way to get statistical information based on their cell phone and whatever software they're using. So, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Pat?
I'm trying to unraise my hand there. Thank you. I think as long as we have the CARES money to cover this, I don't think there's any sense in increasing the risk to our employees with time. So I would suggest that we extend the period of no fares for another quarter of the year, and come back to the issue in July and consider whether we want to start collecting fares in September. That would be my motion.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Okay, we do have a second by Ryan. I have a question, Greg. You know, I guess I go along with not collecting fares, but I just had a question. Do the students have do they have tickets this year? Or are we, I mean, because that would be a bugaboo if you, because I was just thinking that we didn't have school at the beginning of the year, and I didn't know what happened with those tickets and things.
Well, some of the tickets that are used are from the Wausau School District, and so the Wausau School District is a beneficiary of us not collecting fares. Right. When students turn them in, we bill the school district for our ticket price. In terms of our tickets that have already been sold, they're good forever. You know, they're not dated. They're good forever. Someone finds one in their sock drawer, even though we've changed the color, and we still accept it. So no one's going to be shorted by this.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I don't see any other hands. All in favor of continuing to not collect fares and use CARES funds to fund our fare collection, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. That passes unanimously. Back to this. Transit Director's report.
I've just got a couple things for your information. I'm starting to get requests for events. The Hmong Festival sounds like it will be back, as well as the Festival of Arts in the fall. I think next month this item will be on the agenda to decide whether we should participate in those events. Personally, I'm not there yet. You know, shuttle service for an event raises all of the concerns that you just talked about in terms of crowding and a confined space. And so I don't know if we'll be there this fall yet, but I assume these groups will want to know fairly soon so that they can continue their planning process. I have an existing request from the Festival of Arts, and I've told them that we still have capacity limits, so if you need to know now, the answer is no. The Hmong Festival would like to sit down and have a discussion. I just got that the other day. So I think you'll see an item on the next month's agenda regarding this item. The other issue I want to make you aware of is there's another round of funding, the Recovery Act, or whatever it's called, whatever the acronym is. Transit has a separate allocation. And I learned today that there's actually an amount articulated for the city of Wausau in the Federal Register. It's $1.1 million some dollars. However, that's not how it works. So It comes to Wisconsin for small systems in what's called the governor's apportionment, and then the state statute kicks in and determines how those funds are distributed. So I do not yet know how much money we're going to get, but I'm guessing it's going to be around $1 million. So back to the previous item on fare collection, I think we're going to be fine covering passenger fares, for the next period here. I was on the phone with the FTA today to talk about what can the money be used for, and it's weighted heavily toward operating assistance and things like covering passenger fares. The amounts that can be used for capital is uncertain at this point. But I do know there's a time limit on these funds that goes out to 2024, whereas the CARES funds can be used, there's no deadline. So there may be some mixing and matching going on as we move forward on various projects that we decided to fund. And I know we've had a conversation on amending the CARES grant and pursuing some of those projects already, but I'm dragging my feet a little bit to see if it makes more sense to amend or to apply for those projects in the other grant as it comes forward. But we're still waiting to see how that works. The other thing I would mention, I provided an executive 2020 executive summary. This is the piece I used in my conversation with our state elected officials last week. We did a Zoom meeting for the Transit Association, and so I met with Senator Petrowski and Representative Snyder. So this was the piece I used. One of the concerns that we've been hearing, the Transit Association has been hearing, is that CARES funds may be used against entities that receive them. And what I mean by that is they'll offset your award of state funding by the amount of CARES funding that you've received. And that's a concern that I've articulated previously before this body, and why I'm so concerned, about the budget process moving forward. I see this as an opportunity to lose state funding because we received CARES funding, and I hope that doesn't occur. Both representatives seem to acknowledge that that's gotten the state into trouble in the past, and so I'm hoping they don't do that.
I will say, I think you and I talked about this maybe at a meeting last week or something, but I had a meeting with Representative Snyder, and I brought this concern up, and he said that he understood what we were saying and thought that they wouldn't like to do that either, but, he's not on the finance committee, so he was going to ask a couple more questions. So I'm going up to testify at the budget hearing in Rhinelander next week, so if there's anything more I can share, I will be glad to do it.
Excellent. So if you have any questions about this piece or the next round of funding or any of those issues I've just provided you information on, please let me know.
I was just going to add that if there's more information that we can find out, like for, from talking to a number of riders, it just appears that, maybe we need to change the transit seating from the hard plastic, which is a way to encourage short bus riding, to more type of padded type of bus seats, so that people with some health issues, back, spine, and that might be a better option, and as well as seat belts. And then maybe look at, there's some software out there that could maybe replace our existing bus video system with also doing the announcements, and then having more video shots of the entrances and exits, and be able to do the GPS tracking of where the buses are as well, so that if riders are running late, they can see if they can try to catch where the bus will be stopping shortly for the next exit in that. And then, Greg, I was wondering, could you, for maybe a future meeting, give us a list of which shelters are owned by Metro and what are owned privately? And if there can be like welders that modify the bench, so to allow a wheelchair, is that something we can do? Or is there other modifications required at some of the shelters you were saying?
Well, it is our intent, I think we have 7 shelters at this point. None of them are ADA compliant, which is why we've proposed to replace all 7 of them. And that project was intended to go last year, but because of COVID, we haven't proceeded. I think the MPO, Marathon County Planning and Zoning, is going to help us with that project, but that's still our plan. In terms of non-Metro Ride shelters, there are only 2 that I'm aware of. One is on 3rd Avenue, a clinic on 3rd Avenue that put their own in. And then the one in front of Riverview Towers on Grand Avenue is not ours either.
Okay, thank you on that. Yeah, I guess I would be interested in the information in detail, just since I don't know where they're all located, and it would be helpful one way or the other. But for the ADA issue, is it strictly because the bench is totally across and that you need to allow a space now for a wheelchair? So couldn't some of those just, a welder come in, cut the bench off 3 feet, put a new bottom on it, and could we be in compliance with something that simple on the 7?
Well, it's aluminum.
Okay.
So that's a problem.
Maybe we could do this at the next,
Sure.
and have
Sure.
it on the
No,
agenda, so we don't
it's
get
fine.
into a big conversation when it's
That's
not on a
fine.
public agenda.
No, I was just hoping
No,
more.
that's it, and that's fine, just ask, I mean, Greg can certainly come back with some
Yep.
Sure.
information, and we have a discussion next month. How does
Sure.
that sound?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Ryan, second by Pat. Pat's looks like he's on vacation, so thank you, Pat. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.